Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming and welcome to tonight's program, How to Talk to Children About Really Hard Stuff. My name is Chandra Einsbergen, and I am Deschutes Public Library's Youth Services Supervisor. This month, we are celebrating our community reading program called A Novel Idea. A Novel Idea is actually in its 18th year, and for the second time, we are actually including a youth title. Tonight's program is part of our exploration of this year's book, Front Desk by Kelly Yang, where the author draws on her own childhood experiences to offer a candid portrait of one Chinese American immigrant experience through the eyes of her wonderful character, Mia Tang. This event is made possible by our sponsors, so thank you to them. The presenter tonight is Lynne Tat. Lynne has been a middle school counselor in Bend for almost 20 years. She holds a MS in counseling and a BA in education. Lynne identifies as a white, straight, cisgender female. She is an educator, a counselor, and the wife and mother of a biracial family living here in Central Oregon. Lynne is passionate about supporting area youth and creating a more inclusive, just, and equitable community. Lynne, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you all for being here today. These topics are incredibly challenging, emotional, and so important and valuable. I really appreciate everyone taking time to be here today to engage in this conversation. I am presenting today as a white woman. I am from Eastern Oregon. I grew up in Walla Walla, Washington, actually, but my roots are originally from Wallowa County, Oregon. So I am a small town girl who moved to the big city of Bend. And this road of understanding other people's experiences has been a valuable one to me, as the world has brought me different people that have become special parts of my life, including my own family. My husband is Chinese Vietnamese, and my kids are biracial, Asian and white. And we are making our way here in this community as a family, and having conversations about these things all the time. There's my family right there. I am a counselor. I have been a school counselor for almost 20 years here locally in Bend. I graduated from the OSU Cascades Masters in Counseling program, so I do have that background. I was also a teacher first. I taught in Pendleton, Oregon, as well as here in town before moving into the counseling world. I consider myself to be an advocate, and then, of course, my most closely held identities are those of a wife and a mother. So thank you all for being here. I want to acknowledge that my expertise is in talking to kids. I am a counselor. I've worked in education for a long time, and I'm pretty good at talking to kids about some hard stuff. I've had to have some hard conversations in my office. I am not an expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I would consider myself to be a student of those topics still. So the presentation that I'm going to give today, it is coming from my perspective, and I want to be transparent about that. There are lots of resources out there, and I would encourage everyone to do lots of research and get multiple perspectives. Front Desk is the book that brings us here today. I have with me both Front Desk, which I have been reading with my daughter, and also we just started last night, 3 Keys, which is the sequel. Hannah, who is my daughter, actually read this book last year and was very excited about seeing a character that looked like her, that represented her family, and she talked about it nonstop. So when this opportunity came up for the book to be part of the Novel Idea program, I was super excited to be part of it. I've linked a few things in here. I know you don't have access to these things right now, but I linked them here just to show. Do go to Kelly Yang's website. She has resources here that I would encourage everyone to check out. Has a video here about how to talk to teens and kids about corona racism. And there is nothing better than going straight to the source of the author to get her perspective on how to have these really challenging conversations. There's also a fantastic website called Conscious Kid, if that's something that you are not familiar yet with. Books are a fantastic way to have really meaningful conversations with kids about hard things. And Conscious Kid has an awesome list of resources and books on these topics and just on acceptance and raising conscious anti-racist kiddos. And I think that there are a lot of things in this presentation that are just general good tips for talking about hard things, whether you're talking to kids or you're talking to family members or colleagues, and whether those topics are about racism, any other forms of discrimination, hate crimes, violence. Those are all things that are really challenging. And these are, you know, some good tips, some good things to keep in your back pocket. I do want to be really clear that this presentation is going to have my bias in it. I am sharing my expertise as a mom, as an educator, as a counselor, and at the same time, I do not know what it is like to be a person of color having these conversations with my kids. So I just want to acknowledge that. So these are hard conversations, and what gets in the way? Things that get in the way are all of these questions, right? When's the right time? What's the right way? And it's important to recognize that it's okay to have these questions. In fact, the more questions you have, the more you are thinking critically, purposefully, and thoughtfully about this topic. It's also really important to know that there is no perfect answer and there is no perfect way to hold these conversations. It's a journey, it's a conversation, and it is important to model your own growth as you move through these conversations with your kiddos. There's no one right way to do it. And modeling that flexible thinking is really what this is actually all about. I also would acknowledge one of these questions here. How do I make it comfortable? Well, I'm afraid I have some bad news there. Because most likely, if you are doing this, if you're having these conversations with the best intentions, it's not going to be comfortable. It's going to be awkward and it's going to be hard. And again, you're in this conversation with your kiddos, learning together. And if you make a mistake, it is a wonderful opportunity to model for them that that's okay and fail forward, as we say. To prepare yourself, though, before you jump into these conversations, I would encourage you to do some research, to look at the wealth of books and articles and blogs and videos that are out there. There's a lot of free webinars on the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion right now. And the more you know, the easier it is to talk about any topic, whether that's math homework or puberty or racism. If you know what you're talking about, the whole conversation will be easier. So do your research and look to the experts. Look to the people who have these lived experiences and the stories that they have to share. Another tip is to practice talking about your questions, your thoughts, how you're feeling with other adults before you engage in these conversations with your kiddos. Not only does that give you practice time, but it also continues this conversation and models for your kids that it is something important to you beyond just the moment, but something that you're integrating into all of your conversations with the people around you. And finally, reflect. the journey of understanding our biases and the history of our country and racism in our country is a journey. And taking time to reflect about where you are on that journey, what hurdles you may personally still have to work through, doesn't mean you're going to wait to have all the answers before you have this conversation, but it is important to take some time to think about, where are you? What things might still catch you? What biases might you have, so that you are prepared for those to potentially come up in a conversation with your kids. All right. Another thing that I would really want to impress on everyone is this idea of celebrating diversity. It is normal to notice differences among people. What we want to do is celebrate and explore those differences rather than label them or group them or ascribe any kind of judgment to them. So the best ways to celebrate diversity are to cultivate empathy. That means combating that hate and judgment by building the opposite, building up empathy and noticing things about people with kindness and openness. It is okay to recognize those differences without ascribing judgment. Expand your world. Especially those of us in Central Oregon, where there are not as many people of color, not as many different cultures on display, open your child's world. Travel is a great way to do that, not only because of the COVID pandemic, but for a lot of us, travel isn't an option. I'd love to fly to Paris tonight. It's not happening. So there are lots of other ways. And again, books are what brings us here together today. And it is an amazing and fantastic way to expand the world for your kids. Also looking at the toys that they're playing with, looking for representation of different cultures in the activities that they're engaging in the toys that they're playing with. I had a video here to play. I don't have my speaker notes, so I'm not going to be able to do that. But again, I would encourage you to do some research and look for videos on this topic, because there are some really wonderful videos out there talking specifically about ways to incorporate different toys into your child's repertoire of activities. And also, speaking of those activities, taking time as a family to engage in something new, to join a different club, to try a different sport, to take an art class together in something that you're not already comfortable in, to open up your comfort zone, try something new, learn something new, and most likely meet someone new. There is diversity in our community if you are willing and open to look for it. Expand your social network. It's not about who's in your group. It's about who might be missing from your group and how can you include and pull those people in. Next slide. Use the words. Whether you are talking about, there's all kinds of hard topics that we could be talking about with kiddos, right? And it's best practices to use the words, whether you're talking about body parts or race, ethnicity, identity, to use those words to explore these topics. And again, you don't have to know exactly the perfect answers or the definitions, but to open that conversation. It's important to teach about stereotypes and notice again that people are different, but that doesn't mean that every person who is different belongs to a group that is homogeneous. Being clear, direct, factual, vague responses that expect kids to read between the lines are confusing and lead to misconceptions. So say what you mean, use the words. Don't leave blanks. One of my favorite analogies that I tell my kids all the time, they love to say, what the? I'm sure you've heard kids say that before, right? Like, what the? And they're like, but I didn't finish it. And I said, you know what? You didn't have to. Because when you leave that blank, the person that you're talking to fills it in their own mind. And it might not be what you intended. So don't leave blanks. If you leave blanks, you're leaving space for your children to come to their own conclusions that may or may not be what you believe in as a family. State what you believe as a family. And share honestly when you don't know, and make a commitment to learn and come back to the conversation. One more quick note on, celebrating that diversity, using the words. There's an I guess none of it's easy, but an easier kind of perspective that a lot of people have about being colorblind and treating everyone equally and not seeing differences. And I would challenge everyone to set that in the past and look forward. Because when we are not willing to talk about these things, or when we pretend that everyone is the same, it's dismissive to those differences that make us special, that make us all unique, and that play into the experiences we have in everyday life. It's not bad to have differences. Let's celebrate them. So here's another one of those questions that popped up, right? When is the right time to have these conversations? The right time is whenever you're thinking about it. The right time is when it's coming up in conversation. If not now, then when? Please do not avoid this conversation. It's not new. This is a conversation people in our country have been having for hundreds of years. And for many, many people, should I or should I not have this conversation with my kids is not a choice available to them. For many of us, myself included, having this conversation with kids is a choice, and not everyone has that choice. Some people are forced out of need for safety to have the conversation with very young kids. Kids are not too young to have this conversation. They notice differences as early as 6 months and start developing racial bias between 4 to 5. It's never too early to share and celebrate diversity, to cultivate empathy, and to talk to kids about how they're feeling. Silence says something too. So if you're not having this conversation, what might they be filling in the blanks with? Kids will see and hear. They're going to see all kinds of things out in the world, in their classrooms, in their neighborhoods, on the internet. Be the first to address and set the tone for what it is that you want your kids to know and hear and believe. From a white parent to a white child, these conversations will not traumatize. That may not be the case for everyone in the room. And again, I can't speak to what that might be like. But for those of you in the room who are identifying as I am, having these conversations with your kiddos will not harm them in any way. And in fact, will set them up to see the world in a more empathetic way. Speaking of these conversations, the next tip here is that you're going to listen way more than you talk in these conversations. The first thing is to make space for these conversations to happen. That could be car rides. Anytime you don't have to look your kids straight in the eyes is a fantastic time to drop a question, to notice something, maybe playing basketball or going for a walk. Side by side rather than face to face takes some of the pressure off. In my family, we also do table talk. We do highs and lows at the dinner table. Those are great opportunities, as well as bedtime routines. But creating that space for any conversation, for the daily conversation, then when the hard questions come up, you already have that platform to share with your kids. It builds a foundation for the harder conversations later. It's also important to know that conversations about racism and diversity, inclusivity, build trust because they are hard topics. And if you're willing to dive into these things with your kids, they'll be more likely to bring other concerns to you because they know that you're open and willing to listen and talk about hard stuff. I would also challenge everyone to think about this question in your head for a second. How do you know when someone is listening to you? It's important that kids feel heard. And there is a difference between hearing and really hearing what they have to say. So reflect back to them. I think what you're saying is this, or what I hear you saying is this, or I have a question about that. Could you tell me more? Tell me more is a fantastic way to continue the conversation and show interest. Whatever you do, don't them. My husband does that to me all the time. No, okay, that's not listening. That's No, don't do that. Listen to understand, not to respond. Too many times we are busy thinking in our head of what's the right way to answer this question or what should I say next, instead of slowing down and truly listening to what it is that your child is trying to tell you. As you are talking, again, listening means asking questions. What does your child already know? Where are they at in their journey in diversity, equity, and inclusion, in racism and discrimination? What have they seen? What have they noticed? Ask those questions and find out more about where their experiences have led them and use that as a jumping off point. Let their answers lead your conversation. And super important to validate those questions when they come to you. That's a really good question. Thank you for asking that. And validating feelings. That must be really hard to ask. You seem really upset right now. Thank you for sharing. That must be scary. I'm sorry you saw that. Validating their questions and feelings will encourage them to continue talking. And the more they are talking, the more you can listen and the more you will be able to support them moving forward. How can you start the conversation? There is no one-liner I can share. There's no sentence stem. Again, I would say racism is not a new issue. So there's not going to be a perfect way to start the conversation because it's not a one-time conversation. It's not a, okay, I need to have the talk with you. Here's a book that tells me what to say. Instead, you're going to have an ongoing conversation with your kids. Notice things out loud. When you see things, whether that's in your neighborhood, at the grocery store, in a movie, in a book you're reading together, notice out loud, I wonder why that happened. I wonder why that character did that. What do you think about that? Or even, that makes me uncomfortable. I'm not sure how I feel about that. What do you think? Notice out loud, share your thoughts and feelings, and of course, ask what they have noticed. This is not a lecture. You don't need bullet points that tell you what to say next. It's a conversation back and forth. There's also a lovely thing that I lean on heavily in all my work, both as a parent and as an educator, called drip messaging. And that is planting little seeds, dropping little comments, noticing things, sharing an idea, a quote, and then circling back to it. Drip, drip, drip. This is not a one-time conversation that you can have and then walk away from it. It should be embedded in your daily life. When the kids bring the questions to you, answering these tough questions, kids are naturally curious. So encourage those questions. There's no wrong question. There's no bad question. Encourage them to ask what's on their mind. It's also true that kids often think and wonder out loud. So sometimes they're not actually asking a question. They're posing something that's bouncing around in their head. Listen for what your child is really asking you. What is it that they want to know? Are they looking for your reaction? Are they looking for assurance? Are they looking for safety? Or are they looking for a piece of information that you can provide? Where is the conversation coming from? Mirror what they're saying. Clarify rather than react. What I think I hear you saying is, or did you mean, rather than reacting in an emotional way to a question that may be hard for you and is genuine for them? Be brief, simple, honest. Give them facts in small bits. And it is so okay to share that you don't know, and you will learn together. If you don't know the answer to a tough question, validate that. That's a really good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. Let's find out together. Quick side note, I looked and looked and looked and looked for an image with a growth chart that depicted a child of color, and I could not find one. That's something that I never noticed or paid attention to before I had kiddos, that don't look like every other Hallmark card growth chart commercial out there. And now that I am looking for it, I noticed it everywhere. I could not find a child of color standing next to a growth chart image on the internet. For little ones, using the concept of fairness, that is integral to a child's development. This is not fair. Why this and not that? Use that to talk to kids about how we treat other people, about things that they're experiencing in the world. Does that seem fair to you? Start with the basics and let them ask for more. They will guide how much information they're looking for. I like to say, kids don't ask questions that they aren't ready to hear the answers for, if you're really listening to what their question is. So it has to be thoughtful and careful. But if you're certain that they're asking, then they're ready to hear the answer. What your child is ready for might be different than what another kid of the same age is ready for. That is going to depend on their personality, depend on their learning experience, depend on their environment. So really start with the basics and then let them ask the questions and have that guide the age appropriateness of your conversation. For the little ones, developing that empathy, celebrating diversity, expanding their world, those are foundations that you can lay so that as they get older, they have that to build on as the conversations and the questions get harder. As they get older, open that conversation to talking about race, diversity, racism. Point out stereotypes when you see them. Notice racial bias and use examples. How would you feel if that was happening to you? Put yourself in that person's shoes for a second. Gosh, did you hear what that cashier just said? How would you have felt if they said that to you? developing that empathy. And then for tweens, teens, young adults, really expanding that conversation into history, the history of slavery and racism in this country. In Oregon, there are some startling facts if you dig into the history of Oregon. And also encourage action. With your older kids, there is a feeling of powerlessness that comes to being honest and reflecting on the way things are, that is eased by taking action, having a task, something they can do to make a difference. Along that line, it is also important to talk about safety, whether your child is a child of color or a white kiddo. If they're going to attend a protest, if they're going to write a letter, talking to them about ways to do that safely and having plans to take care of themselves so that they can make change in the world, fight for others, while also staying safe for themselves. Most importantly, I hope this is something that everyone walks away from this conversation with. It will not be perfect. It will be messy. It will be uncomfortable. It will be challenging. Silence is worse. Talk to your kids. Let them see your emotions. If these are hard conversations, if these are things that bring up your past experience, it's okay for them to see that. Label your feelings. Normalize that. Pretending that there's nothing uncomfortable about these conversations, or that there's nothing sad about these conversations, that there's nothing frustrating or enraging about these conversations, means that it's okay. So it's important to show that you are having feelings about these conversations and these issues that are rampant in our society right now, because likely your child is having those feelings too. And if you pretend that they aren't there, then they will internalize that as being something wrong, that they shouldn't be having those feelings. So model for them that it's okay. Another tip in the conversation, especially if you're trying to do it right, it's important to remember that you don't need to cover all of this at once, because this is not a one-time conversation. If you get emotional, if you don't know the answer, if you just need a break, take a break. What's more powerful is the ongoing conversation, the circling back. You know, I thought about what you were saying the other day. I've been thinking about that. And I wonder about this. Coming back to it, encouraging more questions, modeling your own learning, modeling the tolerance of discomfort. This is really hard. And it's okay that it's hard, because it's important. Sometimes in your journey of learning, that means rethinking things that you thought you knew. Owning up to mistakes that you maybe have made in conversations with your kids, or in past actions or choices that you've made in your life. Modeling that growth mindset. We tell kids about that all the time. We need to show them that growth mindset. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to learn and grow, and showing them that helps them with that flexible thinking, that critical thinking. Whew, I've been talking a lot. I never give this much information without being like, so what do you think? Tell me about that. I don't know. It's different for me to not have an audience to go through it. Have there been any questions that have jumped up in the chat as we've been talking?
Not so far. It's funny, Lynn. I did, just before we started, I had a friend who couldn't be here who texted me, and like both of her questions you've already answered. Which was,
okay, great.
I don't want to scare my kids, and I don't want to show my kids that I'm upset. and you already talked. So
those are real valid questions though, right? Like those are questions that I've had as a parent. Especially, I mean, honestly, as the parent of Asian kiddos, I don't want to pre-assume that they're going to experience racism and plant that seed in their head when maybe they won't. And so I mean, I think those are valid questions. You don't want to scare your kids. And I guess what I would say to that is that you're not going to scare them if you're there with them, engaging in the conversation alongside them and showing them that you're with them, even when things are hard, even when the conversation's hard, even when the experiences are hard, that you're there. That's not going to scare them. That's going to reassure them.
It builds that trust, like what you said.
Exactly.
Those hard conversations actually builds that trust.
Yeah, exactly. And for feelings too, show them those feelings. Take a break when you need to. I mean, you don't want to be a bawling mess and have them not even be able to understand what you're saying. But it's okay to show them those feelings because that normalizes feelings for them. If you're nervous, they're nervous, and that's okay. To pretend otherwise is to invalidate what they're thinking and feeling. Okay, so the next couple of slides are going into kind of some, what do you do wins? When your child sees racism or discrimination, which they will, and if they're in public schools, if they're in any schools, if they're in the grocery store, they will see racism and discrimination. And so when that happens for them, whether you're there with them or they tell you about it later, ask, what did you notice today? Did anything stand out? And listen. What are they sharing with you? Validate their feelings. What was that like for you to see that? How did you feel in that moment? And then encourage being an upstander. Bystanders stand by and do nothing. And that is not okay. This goes for any situation, whether it's racism, discrimination, because of an identity, or if it's just a bullying situation where there's any kind of power differential, a bigger kid, a younger kid, a smarter kid, a kid that's struggling with something. Bullying happens, and the more our kids can be upstanders rather than bystanders, the better the world will be. My optimistic moment there. Being an upstander doesn't have to mean swooping in with a hero cape and saying, stop this bullying in the hallway. Sometimes that's not safe. And not just meaning physically safe, but for teenagers in particular. My crew is the middle school crew, and sometimes that's not socially safe or emotionally safe to swoop in like that. And sometimes it can even make things worse. So being an upstander is about noticing, being aware of what's going on around you, and also learning how to interrupt, how to deflect. That doesn't sound right to me. I disagree with that. How to distract. That doesn't seem right to me. Let's all go hang out over here. How to circle back. If your kiddo sees something that doesn't feel right, even if it's not safe for them to interrupt in that moment, circling back to their classmate to say, I heard what that person said to you. How are you feeling? Can I help you? Do you want to go report to the teacher? I'll go with you. Circling back, deflecting. I had another thought on that I wrote down somewhere. I guess reporting is what I would say, and this is definitely showing my lens as an educator. But I can guarantee, I can promise you that when kiddos bring situations to me, I take them seriously. And I also know that a lot of stuff happens underneath my nose without my awareness. And I cannot help if I'm not aware. So encouraging kids to be upstanders, but also talking about safety. When is it time to get an adult? When is it time to share with your teacher, your counselor, your administrator, your principal, your parent about what you see happening? It is not kids' job to save the world, but it is important for them to share their experiences with those of us who can make school, church, the neighborhood a safer place for everyone. Another point that I kind of skipped over in here is using that neutral language. The best example that I had was a friend who was really struggling with how their own mother, was talking about people of color and not wanting to trash talk her mom, her kid's grandparent, and also really struggling with not saying anything about these stereotypes that her family member was presenting to her kids. And I really thought that was awesome that she was wanting to not let that stand, to share. And she handled it great. She pulled him aside afterward instead of interrupting in the moment, which just is possible, but didn't feel right to her in that moment. She pulled her kids aside afterward and said, you know what, those things that grandma was saying, I really love grandma. I don't agree with her on that. I don't like what she said. It made me really uncomfortable. We love grandma. We don't agree with her on this. The same can be said with kids at school or any kids in your community. Not calling other people names. That kid's racist. That kid's a jerk. But their words were hurtful. When your child experiences racism or discrimination, ask and listen. My goodness, I think that might be on every slide. Ask and listen. Validate feelings, especially when your child is struggling with being hurt. Let them express that and don't try to fix it. Acknowledge it because it hurts. My kids have come home from school to share with me, Mom, why do people think I eat dogs? Mom, how come everyone says I brought the virus to school? I can't make that not hurt. I just have to sit with them in that hurt and say, that's really hard. That really hurts. Instill confidence in kids through storytelling. Talking about your family, your ancestors, your community in a positive way. Supporting that positive racial identity. Those amazing things about your culture, your community, your family. Talk about those in a positive way. Celebrate those things. Let them hear how much you love their hair. Let them hear how much you love their voice. Let them hear how delicious grandma's spring rolls are. Acknowledge the complexities of it. Nobody in the Vietnamese community here in our town is exactly the same as my family. There are things we have in common, and there are cultural elements that we can celebrate, but my family and the family next door are different. Nurturing a sense of hope that there are things we can do to share ourselves with the world around us. There are things we can do to make the world around us a better and safer place. Talking about safety, making a safety plan for your kids. When you hear something that makes you uncomfortable, what do you do? What's the plan? Where do you go? What do you say? staying aware. To have that conversation with your kiddos is so painful. But to know that they have to stay alert and notice what's going on around them, and then share with you when things are making them uncomfortable or scared. Reaching out to community resources, your community, whether that's a local group, friends, church, school, clubs, there are community resources out there, and reaching out to those people for advice, for support, and for safe space. You do not have to be alone in having these conversations with kids. One of the trickiest, when your child expresses racial bias, which they will, because we all do, how do you respond to that? First, clarify rather than react. I had another friend actually who looked at these slides for me, gave me some feedback. She shared a story at this point right here about her little one. He's only 4, but he loves playing dress up, and he dresses up as, a warrior, as a firefighter. He has all these different costumes in their play space, and he came in a suit. He was dressed up in like a little tuxedo suit, and said, "I'm a Black man." And she was like, "Oh," but also like, "What?" And trying to think, how do I tell him that we cannot pretend to be someone of another background? How hurtful or offensive or assuming that is. But fortunately, she paused for a minute and said, "Huh? What? What do you mean by that?" And after talking with him for a moment, recognized that he wanted to be a man in black, like Will Smith from the Alien movie, The Men in Black. It's important to clarify rather than react, because they may not be saying what you think they're saying. You may be putting a perspective, a layer on top of that wasn't intended. There are also times when kids say really unaware things and ignorant things, and it's important to clarify, "Oh, did that what you meant? Oh, that's what you meant. Okay, we don't say that." So really digging into what it is that your kids what your kid is saying first. Also, watching for statements that link race with judgment. Again, it's okay to notice things. An example of this that I've heard is noticing in the grocery store, "Mom, why is that man wearing a dress?" Looking at someone who's wearing traditional garb. And instead of saying, "Oh, shh, don't say that," to say, "Oh, I think that man might be wearing traditional." I have not seen people wearing traditional garb in the grocery store in Bend, so I'm struggling with that a little bit, but it's okay to say that's true. And that's part of his culture. Celebrate those differences. It's when the comments are linked with judgment that you want to intervene. Keeping the conversation open. It's also okay to be clear on your views and share what you think. Using those I statements. Not attacking your kids or blaming your kids or calling your kids names, but instead saying, "I don't think that way. And I don't think that what you're saying is respectful." If you say, "You're being disrespectful," that may shut down the conversation. Sharing that you disagree is stating your beliefs and opening the conversation. It's also important to correct misinformation. If there is something that your child is sharing with you that you know to be untrue, share that the correct information with your kids. And also remember that stereotypes are oversimplifications. So complicate their thinking. but what about this? Or I wonder if this is true in this situation. Wonder out loud, ask questions, complicate their thinking, offer a new perspective. I hear what you're saying, but I wonder if, encourage them to think about things from new angles and through different lenses. It's also important to look at intent and impact. A kid may say something and not have meant to hurt anyone's feelings. And it still may have. And acknowledging and separating out those two things. I know you didn't mean to hurt this person's feelings. When you said this, I saw their face fall. I wonder what they were thinking. Separating out that intent and the impact, because they're two different things. What you can do as a family. Laundry list of things, right? And it can be small, it can be big, it can be public, it can be private. But it is important to have an action item, so we don't fall into that spiral of feeling like there's nothing we can do, and that powerlessness that comes with hard things that are challenging in our world. Research and donate. Talk about voting. Expand your social circles. Learn about different cultures. Speak up, get involved. Highlight heroes of color. Talk to adults about these conversations in front of them. Shows that it is something you are talking about, not just something you're lecturing them on. Pay attention to online messages. Please, as a middle school counselor, pay attention to online messages. We could have a whole nother session on that one. Make diversity a regular part of your life and continually re-examine your own bias. Dr. Erin Winkler is an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and she gives a great analogy for families, for kids who are feeling like it's such a mess. How can I ever untangle these topics of racism in our community, in our culture? How do I change anything? I feel like I pull on one string and it just makes a knot somewhere else. And so she uses this analogy of a ball of string that's all tangled up, and how it takes time. And we're not going to solve these situations overnight. But every time you pull on a string, you can loosen it. You can untangle it. It doesn't take long to get it in a knot. It does take time and effort and patience and intention to pick it apart. Whew. Questions? Thoughts? Challenges? Anything you'd push back on, or things I didn't get answers?
I really was struck by your thinking about a safety plan. Like, it just, that strikes such a chord with me. I mean, think about all the safety drills we run. We have fire drills. We run them at school, and yes, that may scare children, but it actually, we know it empowers them, right? By talk about the thing and how you're going to deal with it, you're actually empowering them and yourself, and you're talking about it, and you're creating this plan. That just really struck me when you said that, as the, I don't want to scare my children. Right. Talking about it, having a plan, it does the opposite. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And if there's a fire, you want your kids to know where to go, and you want that place to be a safe place. And if there is an emergency, I mean, the reason we practice those drills is because when you're in an emergency situation, you don't always think clearly, and you need to know where to go and where a safe place to go is.
I don't have any other questions yet, but I wanted to really quickly share Lynn has mentioned several times about, expanding your child's world. And truly the library and books are such a great way to do that. The library is there for you. We have created lists in our catalog that are and you can always come and ask us, especially if it's something specific, and we can find you a whole bunch of books that can really help expand you and your child's world. So I think I'm freezing. Am I freezing?
It's a little glitchy.
Yeah.
The kids are getting used to that. Adults have to be used to it too. I don't know how to teach sometimes anymore because they speak in full sentences, and those little glitchy moments don't give me time to think anymore. If you walk away with nothing else, questions, ask questions, listen, let them ask questions, let them answer your questions. Do you see stuff at school? Oh, you do? Okay. What's that like? Or you don't? Why do you think that is? Is it because nothing is happening? Is it because you're not looking for it? Is it because adults are intervening? Is it because, hey, every person in your social circle is white, and so you don't hear those comments?
And if anyone in the audience has questions later, my email is in the description for this program. And you can always email me and I can always pass them on to Lynn. And I'm sure, Lynn, you would be more than happy to answer questions later, right?
I would be more than happy to answer questions later. And I am sure if you Google me, you can get my contact information as well.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Lynn, for all this information. And please, if you have not read Front Desk yet, please do. It's a wonderful book, and it really is a great opportunity to have some wonderful discussions with children. All right. Thank you.